Hello, welcome to Examining Race and White Privilege, presented by Dawn Gagno, Director of Housing and Social Justice at United Educators for Housing and Literacy. You can visit us at our website at www.uehl.org. Our agenda today consists of defining the components to be introduced in this program, a look back at the civil rights movement of the 1960s, at racism and at white privilege, a brief explanation of what social justice can accomplish, followed by a peek into a world without social justice. We will finish up with a short exercise to get us thinking about how racial justice affects our daily lives. This is a 4-unit presentation. Unit 1 is an introduction to what started my involvement in social justice, what social justice is and does, and a general overview of why social justice is imperative to the future of society. In Unit 2, we will discuss race and racism. We will define race both biologically and socially. We will talk about the varied types of racism and about stereotypes. We will also talk briefly about history and the differences between opportunities, about the long struggle for freedom and equality, where it succeeded in emancipation and desegregation, and how it is still failing in criminal justice and voting rights, bringing us to the systemic and institutional racism of today. In Unit 3, we will discuss what it means to be an anti-racist and an ally. We'll talk about segregation and assimilation as forms of racism, and how being an ally in anti-racism can end these practices. We will look to some role models and activists to gain insight and tips on how to be an ally in our daily life. And finally, in Unit 4, we will address white privilege. What is white privilege? Where can it be found? How does it affect society? For many, this will be the most difficult unit. It is the hardest to recognize as a privilege it is, and to come to terms with as well as a white person. I will discuss a couple of instances of my own white privilege and where it has benefited me and where it has demanded a price. At the end of this, we will discuss how to use that same privilege to raise awareness of it and to end the practice of it in our daily lives as we work towards a more equitable future for all people. I would like to share with you a couple of moments in history from my childhood that shaped me into the social justice fighter I am today. When the Civil Rights Act was signed by President Johnson in 1964, it set off a stream of violence that lasted all summer. 2 weeks after signing, riots broke out in Florida between white segregationists and black and white desegregationists. 2 weeks later, a white cop in Harlem shot and killed a 15-year-old black male named James Powell. Rioting in New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia followed. In 1965, still seeking equal rights, John Lewis led 600 marchers from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, seeking an end to the Jim Crow voting restrictions. They too were met with unbridled violence. Today, Black Lives Matter seeks an end to police brutality and systemic racism in our justice system. There are many definitions of racism to be found. I chose these because I think they are the most accurate and the most straightforward. The pervasive, deep-rooted, and long-standing exploitation, control, and violence directed at people of color, and an uneven and unfair distribution of power, privilege, land, and material goods favoring white people, a system in which people of color as a group are exploited and oppressed by white people as a group. This comes from Paul Kivel, the author of Uprooting Racism: How White People Can Work for Racial Justice. Racism is the severe, costly, and lethal rationalization of the denial of human equality and the dignity of all persons. This is from the Global Campaign for Peace. I see racism and white privilege as being intertwined, as feeding off of one another to the detriment of all. Racism has always felt wrong to me, from those early days and into today. Today, it feels even worse because I understand it more and because it affects my daily life in ways I couldn't imagine as a child. Peggy McIntosh says white privilege is an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, assurances, tools, maps, guides, code books, passports, visas, clothes, compasses, emergency gear, and blank checks. It means that there are struggles facing people of color that we, as white people, will never experience. That privilege brings power, and that power corrupts. Many white people are fearful that if they admit the privilege exists, they will lose the silent benefits they receive due to it. I've had to discuss police brutality and racism with my grandchildren, one of whom is also autistic. We can't tell him if he's in trouble to go to the police, because he's convinced that if he does, they will kill him before he can tell them he needs help. He lives in a world of mistrust and suspicion because of what he sees and hears around him. This violence, this fear, this stoking of racism has to stop. Following the announcement that Joe Biden chose Kamala Harris as his presidential running mate, a Virginia mayor is being asked for his resignation over a Facebook post in which he said that Joe Biden just announced Aunt Jemima as his running mate. This man has access to the media and is making stereotypical racist slurs about a very powerful, strong, biracial woman. Children should not have to learn such racism from our leaders. They should not be indoctrinated into systemic racism. We have to end it. We must fight for social justice. Social justice provides and promotes fairness and equity across all aspects of our lives. The National Education Association provides this. Social justice is a concept of fair and just relations between the individual and society. This is measured by the explicit and tacit terms for the distribution of wealth, opportunities for personal activity, and social privileges. In the current global grassroots movements for social justice, the emphasis has been on the breaking of barriers for social mobility, the creation of safety nets, and economic justice. Social justice is a difference between equality, equity, and justice. This graphic is good. It clearly shows the difference between equality and equity. But when it shows justice, it could still go one step further, by completely removing the barrier altogether. Although this claims the cause of the inequality was addressed and the barrier removed, the barrier remains. It's just now you can see through it. Just because a barrier becomes transparent does not mean it has been removed. Social justice. What does it do? Social justice leads to fewer reasons for differences and an ability to accept and value others and their ideas as well as our own. Social justice incorporates our ideas, morals, beliefs, values, and culture into our society. This is where our laws are created and enforced. Social justice fights against perceived injustices, such as ageism, sexism, and racism. Social justice is mutable and can change as society changes. Social justice has led to huge changes in laws and rights. These include voting rights, granted to black men nearly 50 years before women, and civil rights. One of these changes occurred in 1967 with Supreme Court ruling in Loving v. Virginia, a case where a white man married a black woman in another state and moved to Virginia, a state that refused to recognize the interracial marriage as legal. It finally ended up in front of the Supreme Court, which legalized such marriages and legitimized biracial families. This ruling, based on anti-discrimination, was later a basis for legalizing gay marriages on the same basis of anti-discrimination. Imagine, if you can, a world in which social justice was completely missing. This is easier to do than it should be. Many countries around the globe still have no social justice. Girls can't go to school, women can't drive or vote, some can't even work without permission from their husbands. Oppression and violence are normal in daily lives. Social justice prevents social injustices. Voices are not silenced, people are not marginalized, and superiority has no place. Socially just policies affect all classes and ethnicities, all races and all genders. Without socially just policies, we are at the mercy of the powerful and of the silent who refuse to oppose them. Without social justice, We live in fear and uncertainty if we are not the ruling class. Silence is not an option, and our Constitution guarantees our right to speak out in the First Amendment. It's that important. It is up to us to use that right to prevent injustice and to seek a better way forward. Silence enables injustice. Don't be silent. Speak out. This is the last component of Unit 1. Take a few minutes or so to think about your daily life and the encounters you might have with the world around you. Identify at least 3 aspects of life that can be affected by racism in each of the following categories: personal, economic, and cultural. Okay, let's come back together and see what we've come up with. These are the basic ones I have identified. They are far from the only ones. Personal, family, friends, neighbors, social media, social organizations like clubs, churches, charities, etc. Economic, jobs, education, housing, sports, equal opportunity employment, and security. This includes safety, policing, and criminal justice. Cultural, history, museums, monuments, music, arts, theater, retail, traditions, and religious practices. I hope this gives you some food for thought as we prepare for our next unit. Congratulations, you've completed Unit 1. Thank you for your participation, and I look forward to our next unit on race and racism. Take some time to process these ideas, and please share your thoughts or comments with me at dawngagno@hotmail.com. Please use Racial Justice Unit 1 feedback in the subject line. Thank you very much.